This is a production of Cornell University.
Today, universities are challenged to become more actively engaged with society, government, and the private sector. By partnering with people to reduce inequities and provide greater access to knowledge gained from anthropological research, universities can play a larger role in democratizing society. This engaged stance moves the application of theory, methods, and practice toward action and activism, and reduces the growth of disparities in underserved communities. In a talk presented at Mann Library in April 2014, Sam Beck, senior lecturer in the College of Human Ecology and director of Cornell's Urban Semester program, presents his new book, Toward Engaged Anthropology. Co-edited by Maida, the book offers a collection of essays by 7 experts on a new form of engaged public anthropology that is taking hold in the field.
Pleasure to introduce Sam, and I know I never use his last name; it's just Sam.
That's how I like it.
Yes, and then when I looked at his bio, I never you sort of go through years and years. I've known Sam a long time, and I had no idea that he was born in Shanghai, China, in a Japanese concentration camp, is what his bio says. Then, when Shanghai was with the liberation of Shanghai, his family then moved to Vienna, Austria, and then they came to the United States. But Sam ended up studying around the world, really, and I think from reading his bio, you get a sense of how culture and his study of culture was motivated by his experiences through so many wonderful, wonderful travels. It's very impressive. So I came to know Sam when I became first a faculty member and then associate dean. So Sam reported to me, and I truly had an amazing experience watching Sam transform students' lives through the urban semester program. So it was originally field studies. He was director of field studies. Then he was charged developing an urban semester program. And this program, I don't know how many students have gone in and out of this program in the fall semester, the spring semester, during the summer. But the number of letters I've gotten from students that talk about their experience working with Sam and that program, from alumni I visit that talk about their most greatest experience at Cornell was being in Sam's program. You learn to realize what a rare gift Sam is to Cornell. So we have like chronicle stories on this book. We did one, and then 4 on faculty received the Carpenter Advising Awards. These are the most prestigious advising award Cornell gives out. Then he was honored recently in 2013, just last year, for his Brooklyn service projects that students work in North Brooklyn and have an immersion experience. So it's really, again, when you see it cumulatively, he has had one of the largest impacts on students than anyone, frankly, at Cornell. And then when Sam and I worked together in our role, we had many, many conversations about anthropology and how ethnography develops and how the students in the urban semester program can learn so much from Sam's experience as an anthropologist, and that New York City, being the diverse place it is an incredible place to study anthropology and ethnography. And so when I saw that this book, Engaged Anthropology, was being published, it was such a great culmination event because it's clearly so influenced by his experiences working and tutoring and mentoring students in this. And what I really am proud of is that Cornell as a university is very, very much now wanting to do this more on a large scale. So the whole Engaged at Cornell program, and there's huge resources. A great gift came for this. There's more gifts to come to the university probably around this. We are set up as a college so perfectly to take that broad mission that Cornell has for engaged learning, and I keep using this program and Sam's leadership around this as the model for how to do this and do this meaningfully, so that it's scholarship, that students actually, there's clear learning outcomes, there's learning goals, and people come out of this not only better scholars, but better citizens of the world. So with that, I really am very excited to hear your talk, and again, you've been a gem for the college, so I can only thank you for your hard work and toil over many, many years. Sam Beck. Oh, you have one, yours hooked up.
Yeah.
So.
All I can say is, oh, shucks. I don't know if I can take all of that. But thank you, Alan, and thank you for the kind of support I've gotten from you and the Associate Dean, Carol Bissoni, and the whole college. It's been an extraordinary experience. And as you folks know, I mean, our students are extraordinary, and all you have to do is kind of let them go. And generally they'll do the right thing. And they're highly motivated. I'll actually talk a little bit about some of the things that Alan mentioned, both about me and about the program. So let me start, and hopefully you'll bear with me. I have a text, and if I speed up, just raise your hand and I'll slow down. It's common enough to hear that much of higher education has failed to equip our younger generations with specific skills to obtain gainful employment. This is because the goal of higher education has changed. The separation of higher education from the real world may have had a purpose in the past, but nowadays this is being questioned. The challenge now is to provide more opportunities for engagement and anchor theory in practice through the implementation of internships and community service learning. In our book, my co-editor and I suggest a change in which knowledge production takes place. We argue that theorizing is integral to practice, but in specific contexts. The separation of theory from practice is an historical and artificial separation. Although Toward Engaged Anthropology brings together 7 different case studies that suggest the roles anthropologists are able to play to bring us closer to public anthropology characterized as engagement, the chapters are also suggestive as to how community service learning may lead to a deeper form of engagement. All the articles in various contexts recognize that we are who we are because we engage others, and that anthropologists in particular have an important role to play, not only engaging other disciplines, but as citizens engaged in the struggle for a more equitable and just society. This certainly has implications for undergraduate education and the possibilities that could be explored by integrating theory with practice. Anthropologists have always been engaged, giving voice to the other, seeking to translate and make understandable the strange and different to others, and more recently producing texts that do this in collaboration with the other. This collaboration requires a transition in our fieldwork practice from anthropologists as onlookers and experts to co-producers of knowledge and co-practitioners in the context of reducing or eliminating inequities and injustices. Anthropological engagement has always been about challenging customary restrictions, building alternative visions, and having an understanding that being human is a social condition. I'm going to run through what each of the chapters is about, and in doing so, not really do justice to all they contribute. The rest of my talk is a reflection on my personal journey toward engaged anthropology that led me to this book. As I reflect on the work my students and I are doing as we engage North Brooklyn communities, I hope you will see that each chapter in the book is reflected in the various projects we have worked on. Team study of North Brooklyn through community-based participatory action research, involvement in public discourse and engagement in community identity development, the impact of capital withdrawal and investment generating changes in the landscape and populations, addressing the oftentimes invisible processes of large-scale political and economic forces, the use of dialogics to build consciousness, decoding, interpreting, and facilitating for groups involved in advocacy work, and shifting anthropology to working with people, not helping them. Carl Maida's chapter, this is my first PowerPoint, so you'll have to forgive me. Maida's chapter focuses on a long-term study of Pacoima, California. It's a community-based participatory action research project of an urban community and how knowledge specialists in the sciences and social scientists from multiple institutions and their students work together with Pacoima residents and their lay knowledge to improve their lives. Here is an example of engaged anthropology when the concern is less about text production and more about the empowerment of local people to resolve local issues. Thomas Eriksson provides an account of the accepted role of Scandinavian anthropologists in public venues and their participation in public discourse. European intellectuals are allowed a role in interchanges in the public media that's not so common in the United States. Eriksson asserts that what academicians present in the media impacts both public politics and government policies. In this sense, he says, engagement is able to blur the boundaries between research and politics. Brian McKenna raises into relief the ways in which the multinational Dow Chemical Company influences Michigan State University's research agenda. McKenna's is a biting critique of higher education more generally by allowing itself to be integrated into the capitalist market as a knowledge factory. Judith Good, who's a Cornellian, identifies a contradiction inherent in public anthropology, describing her personal engaged journey in Philadelphia. In her words, it is the drive to raise the worth of disciplinary expertise and stake a claim to authority in the world of policy elites, and simultaneously offer critiques of the very institutions that are gatekeepers for public knowledge for non-academic audiences. She recommends that anthropologists free themselves from jargon and ask the kinds of questions the public is asking, simultaneously pointing out that there is a context in which issues arise and that need to be addressed, and that there is a need to address the complexity of oftentimes invisible political and economic forces. Udi Butler comments on a dialogical anthropology with young Brazilian favela residents in Rio. He is a liberatory anthropology, a la Paulo Freire, to build critical consciousness among them, enabling them to identify unequal power relationships in which they live their lives. His focus is on process rather than outcomes, and viewing process as an anthropological product. Raul Acosta's work takes place in Canarana, Brazil, and explores the role of anthropologists as decoder, interpreter, and facilitator for groups involved in advocacy networks. He describes his work as a facilitator in the successful interchanges among stakeholders because anthropological observations provide an understanding of the context specificities and the complexities of dialogue, linkages, and relationships across different cultural practices. By participating in advocacy work, anthropologists are not only describing spaces, their components, and the relationship among social groups who use these spaces, but through engagement, we may also help shape the discourse involved in identifying these spaces and the quality of the social interactions. Billie Jean Isbell provides a biography of the Cornell Vicos Peru project that has a history of over 50 years. She maps out the shift in applied anthropology from helping people to working with them. Isbell asserts that one contribution made by this project was to raise into a larger public view the terrible conditions of subjugation of indigenous upland people by the hacienda system. In the 1980s, I started asking myself how in the most humanistic way could I carry out research about people by participating in their lives, not as a stranger, but as an ally. In what follows, I will quickly provide an autobiographical account that led me to the kind of anthropology I advocate and practice, and how this helped me formulate my pedagogical approach to the urban semester program. I then discuss some of the forces and conditions that have generated this notion of engaged anthropology, and then finally, I discuss what my students, colleagues, and I do in North Brooklyn. For me, engagement is deeply personal. It's professional, and it's public. Personal development intersects with professional development. You can ask any of my students. My own experiences of injustices led me to explore ways of rectifying these. My pre-college days were defined by many adjustments. I was born in a Japanese refugee camp, a ghetto for German and Austrian Jews who made their way to Shanghai in the 1930s. When Mao, victorious in 1949, I came to live and went to public school in post-World War II Vienna as an Austrian refugee returnee. In 1955, I moved to Los Angeles as an immigrant, and during my last high school years came to live in Portland, Oregon. I found this in a collection of stuff. That's me right there. I graduated from Portland State with an anthropology degree after spending an undergraduate year in Yugoslavia at the Zagreb University. Not much later, I joined a research project in Iran, where I lived 2 years with Turkish-speaking pastoral nomads. I joined the University of Massachusetts Anthropology Department with the intention of carrying out research with Yugoslav migrant workers, and had a summer in Germany piloting this study. For political and strategic reasons, this was not to be. Instead, I joined a research team carrying out a regional cultural ecological study of Transylvania, placing 5 graduate students and a professor in 5 different villages at different elevations and climatic zones with different ethno-religious and linguistic makeup and different political relations with the communist state. This resulted in my doctoral thesis about private upland ethnic Romanian worker peasants. I followed this work with postdoctoral study of ethnic economic specialization in the same area of Transylvania where my doctoral work took place. I discovered that gypsy settlements were everywhere. Each group had its own occupation, but the different groups did not identify with each other. It was my good fortune to meet a gypsy sociologist. He was organizing disparate groups, most of whom, with some exceptions, were living in abject poverty, being discriminated against as a people of color, and whose occupations and economic activities, too often illicit in the communist state, rubbed non-gypsy people and the authorities the wrong way. He was doing activist anthropology, using participant observation and participant action research methods. He was employing ethnographic methods to carry out research while simultaneously helping his people gain a political voice and position in his highly controlled society. The high level of alcohol consumption in Romania led me to a Brown University postdoctoral program in alcohol studies, where one goal I was to reach was the ethnographic study of the relationship of alcohol and culture in one local social group in Providence. I ended up at Manny Almeida's Ringside Lounge, a black bar. They were Cape Verdeans of Portuguese African ancestry who differentiated themselves from African Americans. They settled in the oldest part of Providence called Fox Point and had been living there for over 100 years. Through the 60s and 70s and 80s, Cape Verdeans were displaced by urban renewal, interstate highway construction, and the historic preservation movement, programs engaged in slum clearance and blight removal. To carry out ethnographic research, I placed myself in the community, acquiring housing in the neighborhood, and spent as much time as I could, mostly hanging out, being visible, participating, and observing. Participant observation entails involvement in the community of people or community of practice being studied. This includes various forms of interviewing, surveys, and of course, just listening, overhearing discussions taking place. I hung out at Manny Almeida's Ringside Lounge. In my fieldwork abroad, I was always an outsider with a specific role. I was the American who was present to write a book about the people. Ethnographic work entails long-term immersion, talking to people and observing the world. The ethnographer is the tool for generating the data. I had to be careful not to assume that my experiences were the same for the people I was engaging. It was important to compare how they did things, how they thought about things that was different or the same as my experiences, and most importantly, to understand what it is they experienced and their explanations of their experiences from their point of view. Not only does this entail deepening one's understanding of the other in a process of becoming the other, but it also entails reflection on one's observations and experiences as this transformation is occurring in context and in process. In doing ethnographic fieldwork, we try to become the other, to understand the other from their point of view. My work with Cape Verdeans in Providence reinforced the idea of being visible in the community, to be seen or somehow part of the community and not as an outsider coming in. I also had to come in with a few preconceived notions about who they are, what they do, and perhaps even what it is I wanted to find out. It was important for me to demonstrate an authentic curiosity and a strong sense of wanting to learn from them, to build relationships of trust and familiarity that take time to grow. Over time, they expressed the need for community memory of what once was, to acknowledge that Cape Verdeans had occupied a space and had a physical presence in a place that had rapidly changed to house people very different from them, with very different living standards and commercial needs. Manny Almeida's Ringside Lounge was purchased and turned into a hip clam bar. Cape Verdeans didn't want to be forgotten. I put together a book that reflected their perspective called Manny Almeida's Ringside Lounge, the Cape Verdean struggle for their neighborhood. Their point of view about their community was one that reflected an emotional attachment to their neighborhood, whose members were knit tightly together through kinship, friendship, and neighborliness. I played an activist role. These are all issues my students and I confront in Brooklyn. Now I turn to the urban semester program. In 1992, the College of Human Ecology asked me to develop New York City's urban semester. I inherited a program that had two experiential learning components, internships and community service learning. The foundational principles were articulated as aspects of educational theories and methods derived from David Kolb, who drew his ideas from pragmatist philosopher John Dewey, the originator of participatory action research, Kurt Lewin, who incidentally spent, I think, a semester here, and developmental psychologist Jean Piaget. I would be remiss not to mention the Chicago School of Sociology trained and Cornell University's own urban ethnographer, William Foote White. His influence as an applied anthropologist was particularly strong and had a social justice twist, creating what he was interested in was reducing the gap between the rich and the poor and creating the conditions for empowerment among the vulnerable in society. With this in mind, I took on the task of building the urban semester program in New York, first by attracting many more students, and second in developing the community service learning part of the program. I was influenced by two strong traditions in anthropology: the study of communities in their larger context, a la Eric Wolf and John Cole, and the case study method, a la Max Gluckman and the Manchester School. The first locates communities in the political economic forces of a world system defined by the flow and withdrawal of capital, a contextualized historical process. The second is to use specific case studies to make more generalizable theoretical statements from the ground up. I won't address the internship part of the urban semester, although it too could be arguably placed within an engagement framework. I'll now turn over to community service learning. At present, community service learning in higher education has a decades-old history and is spread across a host of disciplines. It's shaped by some central ideas about learning as knowledge production. Of particular significance is the recognition that this is a pedagogical device bringing students, but also faculty who use it, closer to the real world. As such, inherent in community service learning is a relationship between classroom learning and the real world, theory and practice, and engagement. Significant pressure on higher education from government and the private sector was mounted to expose students to U.S. civic culture, with community service learning used as a kind of citizenship training that provides students an impetus for playing a role in society at large when they reach full adulthood. This is often tied to the idea of the American tradition of volunteerism and democracy. For institutions of higher learning, where ethno-racial and class diversity is an issue, community service learning provides an opportunity for this kind of exposure, because much of this kind of educational engagement involves low-income people of color and fits higher education's multicultural diversity and disparities work. Another central aspect of community service learning is to teach students how to carry out field-based research. This requires faculty members to generate researchable topics for students to explore. Here the tension lies with how host communities or organizations are used for community service learning courses to succeed. More often than not, research is based on faculty expertise and interests rather than the needs of a community or organization. This creates a tension not easily overcome. There may or may not be a product that the community is able to use. Faculty may publish findings or experiences or present a paper at a national conference about their work. This tension reflects the difficulties institutions of higher learning face to include this kind of engagement work as the basis for awarding tenure and promotion, unless this work can be identified as scholarship. Central to anthropological practice is participating in ethnographic fieldwork and using participant observation as the principal method for generating data. My role in working in North Brooklyn is complex because I've become part of the community in which the Urban Semester program is active. I live there. I'm involved in 2 different organizations as a member of their executive boards. I use my experiences in the community as a source for my academic work, publishing and teaching. I came to this form of anthropological engagement as a result of some basic dissatisfaction regarding traditional forms of fieldwork that mirror traditional forms of community service learning. That is to say, we carry out forays into communities, usually those most vulnerable in society, do our work, and then leave. I also was dissatisfied by the idea of merely gathering data and publishing based on my experiences and leaving virtually nothing for the community that in no uncertain terms supported my work and made my work possible. About 15 years ago, I decided to commit the urban semester to one section of New York City where student resources could make a difference. This is where North Brooklyn came into play. See, I lost track of what I was doing. There. Similar processes of capital withdrawal and intentional underdevelopment struck North Brooklyn, just like the Fox Point Cape Verdean area of Providence, producing efforts of slum clearance and blight removal. The Brooklyn-Queens Expressway cut through neighborhoods like a hot knife through butter. Thousands of people were displaced. The migration of Puerto Ricans and later Dominicans to North Brooklyn coincided with the movement of white ethnics to the newly built suburbs, creating the so-called white flight and their replacement by people of color. The large swath of manufacturing buildings and warehouses along the East River were abandoned as government plans sought to change New York City's economic base. This property in the last decades has become prime real estate for luxury housing speculators as the cost of Manhattan real estate shot through the roof. Artists, students, and an emerging youth population known as hipsters in addition to luxury housing tower development, caused gentrification and large-scale displacement of working poor Latinos who depended on affordable private housing. A much smaller percentage of the Latino community was able to obtain subsidized housing. At a time when the Williamsburg section of North Brooklyn has had a Latino majority in the 70s and 80s, at present their number was reduced by 2/3. Housing is central to Latino sustainability in North Brooklyn. Access to decent education enabling upward mobility would allow for an increased earning power among a mostly blue-collar Latino population, something that continues to be denied them as a result of ineffective public schools. Over the last 6 decades, the Roman Catholic churches in the area have played an important role in sustaining the community by participating in the development of organizations that maintain and generate affordable housing and by providing superior schools used by the community. They also have provided recreational facilities and youth development programs that keep young people from participating in risky behavior. I felt that the Urban Semester program could play a positive role here. We first connected with the Beginning with Children School, whose founders are Cornellians, Carol and Joe Rich, who embraced us. I sought to work with the school to improve their children's educational outcomes. However, over a number of years, I found that my students were being used as teacher assistants, but were not really adding much to the quality of the education the children were receiving. Nor were my students gaining much of an understanding of the issues that the community as a whole was facing in light of impoverished households seeking to remain in the community as increasing rents were driving them out. The Beginning with Children Foundation was providing enormous amounts of support and was succeeding in providing its children with a superior education and a support structure that sought to hold onto their children through high school and college. They really didn't need us. My hope of making a significant contribution to the community through this effort did not come to fruition, nor was my plan to co-create knowledge to improve children's lives. Our assessment or insights were not needed or even wanted. That's when I met John Mulhern in the process of seeking another way of contributing to the Latino community. He was one of the founders and the executive director of Nuestros Niños Child Development Center and an important fixture in the community. He had been a priest and married into the community, raising his children there. We were really needed here, where John wanted the children to be exposed to college students who were mostly white and who spoke English. His concern was that his children would not be prepared to enter the public schools with the limited English language skills, and he was seeking a wider worldly exposure for his kids. Our students participated in the classroom with the children and teachers. Through John, I met Father Jim O'Shea, who was working with neighborhood teenagers in an organic after-school program in a church basement. I credit our involvement there for helping to keep some of those teens off the street and in school and motivating them to do well. Williamsburg, in the post-World War II era, suffered a dramatic decline, much like many urban areas in the United States. The country was transitioning from manufacturing to a service economy. An upwardly mobile, educated middle class moved into the newly built suburbs. Puerto Ricans, then Dominicans, moved into the areas abandoned by the white ethnics in Williamsburg. The so-called white flight brought about a depreciation of real estate and the abandonment of large sectors of the neighborhood by landlords. In the 70s, Latino residents organized themselves with the assistance of charismatic and progressive Roman Catholic priests and created the institutions that stabilized the built environment while creating a cultural commons. The rising costs of real estate speculation, and the construction of luxury housing raised the price of rental properties. With affordable housing for those with low incomes becoming increasingly scarce, the number of people leaving the neighborhood threatened the sociocultural and economic fabric that took decades to weave. What in the 1970s and 80s was a fight to keep Latino families housed in buildings that had to be repaired, maintained, and managed by local organizations, became a fight to keep people housed by creating affordable housing units and preventing racialized housing segregation from taking place in existing affordable housing complexes. Through Jim, our students got involved in Churches United for Fair Housing, an affordable housing advocacy 501c3 group, and later with his Reconnect project to work with young men whose life experiences has left them with few opportunities upon which to build a life. They opened the Reconnect Cafe in Bedford-Stuyvesant just this year, where these young men serve as baristas and where they sell the baked goods they make in an off-site kitchen. Our students work alongside with them in various capacities. In the meantime, Rob Solano, who had worked with Jim as a board member, took on the leadership of Churches United. This community-based organization advocates affordable housing. Our students support the organization in different ways. Everything from developing intake forms to carrying out field research, data entry and analysis, performing workshops, preparing the annual spring gala event, which happened last night, got home at 1 o'clock, leafleting and providing information to community people looking for housing. They also organize and implement arts and recreation programs in Williamsburg and in Bushwick. Students work with Nuestros Niños and Los Sures Senior Center providing nutrition programs. They work with Woodhull Hospital's asthma program, doing public health education and outreach in schools and in senior centers. During a meeting with Ram Peguero of the Los Sures organization, we were asked for help in developing a local museum that would showcase Williamsburg's Latino history and continued presence similar to my Cape Verdean work. We worked with a number of community people, and the El Museo de los Sures was created. Students engage the community in various ways by participating in community affairs. In turn, community leaders appreciate that the urban semester is taking interest in the workings of the community and have become willing partners in teaching students about the neighborhood, the communities that live there, and who compete for housing and other resources. Many of its leaders have become part of the urban semester program by sharing their knowledge and wisdom with the students in seminars. The Latino part of North Brooklyn is complex, with various leaders and organizations that have taken root there to support the needs of the community. Central to their needs has been and continues to be affordable housing, quality education, efforts to reduce violence both at home and in the streets, and the restoration of civil rights. Students engage real-world issues in the urban semester program, and these real-world issues are complex. Even in a relatively small area defined by Williamsburg, such issues cut across ethnicity, race, class, and gender, and reflect many facets of globalization and the impact of withdrawal or investment of capital. Williamsburg and Brooklyn, more generally, are arguably the hottest residential real estate market in New York City. Local community leaders and government officials enter into discussions with students to help them understand the socioeconomic, cultural, and health issues that face North Brooklyn people, particularly those populations most vulnerable. Students also participate in various community meetings to observe community dynamics. With the support of government tax abatements, hipsters and yuppies help luxury housing real estate developers create the conditions for gentrification and displacement. As students participate in the struggle to sustain this community in their social, cultural, and economic commons, help develop among them a sense of unity, and reproduce a sense of shared neighborhood, they come to realize that people in Williamsburg do not see themselves as victims. They do see that they are operating under conditions that disadvantage them, but that despite these circumstances, they seek control over their own lives and those of their neighbors and their neighborhood, and work to improve their community. They also see leadership in action at the local community level. While students are in the community a very short period of time, often do not see the impact that they have, the organizations with whom we work do and regularly communicate their appreciation of the resources that our students and the urban semester program provide. Over the course of one semester, students experience engagement with the real world through a system of structured reflections and their experiences in self-chosen internships and assigned community service, participation, and action. Their consciousness about the real world and their place in it is raised. By the end of the semester, they see themselves as knowledge producers, have an awareness that they are thinking critically, are able to more rapidly process new information and communicate their own ideas, work effectively with others, play the role of self-directed learners, are exposed to a wide range of ethno-cultural, racialized, and class diversity, are put into situations where they must puzzle over ethical and moral dilemmas, are placed in leadership development situations, and of course use ethnographic methods to learn experientially. In conclusion, I'm sure you're happy to hear that. In conclusion, here I advocate a transformational approach to engaging anthropology that involves a shift in consciousness through which anthropologists provide a grounded perspective on structural factors and power relationships that contribute to social and economic disparities. This approach holds researchers responsible for partnering with the most vulnerable communities and groups in co-constructing research, thereby enhancing their ability to carry out transformational changes as they co-design them. Central to transformational research, activist, and service priorities of anthropology is defining and securing quality of life for the most vulnerable by working with them, expose the market-based commodification of the natural and cultural commons, and rectify unjust inequalities. Central to engaged anthropological practice that is transformational is identifying the assemblages of human suffering resulting from inequitable distributions of political, economic, and social power. Rectifying these by informing policy and changing policy, participating in action to inform the public and participate in activism as an aspect of service and citizenship, and doing so by intentionally being involved personally, professionally, and as a member of society. Thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University. On the web at cornell.edu.